Today on the WEInvested podcast, we have Brandon Kleinman, and he is the founder of Capsule. Brandon, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really happy to be here. How you doing, Wesley?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm excited for this interview. And before we get started, can you let the people know how they can find you and contact you on social media and throughout the internet?
Yeah. I'm BK Senior on Twitter and just about every other platform. That's BK and SENIOR. Or you can send me an email at brandon@trytimecapsule.com.
That's perfect, man. So, let's just kind of start from the top and talk a little bit about, where you grew up.
Yeah, I'm actually one of those rare breeds. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. And so grew up in the suburbs of LA. And yeah.
Nice, man. And so, LA is a huge city, a lot of diversity, a lot of different cultures, and a lot of wealth there too. So, how would you say that being born and raised in LA kind of impacted your outlook on life and success?
Yeah, I come from a funny background in LA. I had essentially two educational kind of tracks. I was, middle class, regular middle class. We didn't come from much money, but my parents, or my mom specifically, was a teacher at a pretty wealthy school. And so up through elementary school, I went to a wealthy school. I didn't have the same stuff as all my friends, but I got to see a lot of it. And then when I got to high school, I got shipped to an LAUSD magnet program in I don't know if anyone on here is familiar with Reseda, where it was it wasn't like dangerous or anything, but we had our fair share of, bomb threats, stabbing, shootings, all that good stuff. And so it ended up being that I kind of got the buffet style from an education perspective. And I feel like not only do my friends and kind of their backgrounds reflect it, but you get to see a lot of perspectives, and it's super helpful later in life as you start to kind of build things where you want different people to be a part of it and to kind of have power within it. And so I got very lucky in that I kind of got to do a little bit of everything growing up.
No, man, that's amazing. And so it's like you got the chance to see both sides, the experience,
and more
two different walks of life.
Yeah, that's right. And more importantly, I think, you talk about, I know this is about the mindset thing. We'll probably get to it. It's this idea, seeing a lot of people with things or with means and stuff like that, and not necessarily having them yourself, but not being so far off that you're struggling altogether. My parents provided, it was great. I ate, I got to go to, class. I had a bunch of learning disabilities growing up, and I got a little bit of help with that. But then also seeing all the stuff that I did not have was probably helpful in keeping, a healthy chip on my shoulder as I got older.
For sure. So it was never a shortage on inspiration and knowing man, I can achieve that if I try hard enough, if I work hard enough.
Yeah, I would actually flip that. I've always been everybody always used to say that I kind of marched to my own drum. And so I was in trouble a lot as a kid, a lot. And it kind of became one of these things where you kind of get faced, how we say this, I love working with entrepreneurs, other entrepreneurs that kind of are different or have been disruptive, not in the traditional way that you hear in the media, but have had a life of getting in trouble or doing stuff that was a little off the cuff. But, when you're young, and whether you have ADD, you're dyslexic, or you have one of these things, you end up running into most education systems where they'll, say that you're unteachable, or they'll say that you don't fit into the current system. And you kind of indirectly get faced with this question, which I didn't realize until decades later, whether it's either they're wrong or I'm wrong. And I think what ended up happening, when I was really young and having this happen over and over and over again, is I made a choice, and my parents protected me, which was amazing, that I was going to continue to do me, even if I continued to get it kind of in trouble and explore the stuff that I was good at and what the boundaries were on that. And so I'd say it was that. It was kind of watching being different in all the different ways, and where you could fit in and what made you different, and figuring out why it was special and why it was potentially dangerous and kind of all that stuff. If that makes sense.
For sure. I mean, and I think it's important too to, march to the beat of your own drum. And I think very important for entrepreneurs to do, and like a quality for entrepreneurs to have, is to be able to kind of think outside of the box, which, leads me to my next question. Before we started recording, you were talking about, your company, and it sounds like something really interesting, and something that I haven't heard of. So, what is Time Capsule?
Yeah, man. Time Capsule is essentially, it's a product that you buy for your loved ones. And what it does is, our kind of Time Capsule classic is, you'd buy it for your mom maybe, or your grandma, and it would send her via email a question about her life every single Sunday. So something along the lines of, maybe, what was high school? Were you good at sports in high school, and what did you play? Down to, what do you remember about the first time you met dad or grandpa? And so every week they answer it, they type it, they can drop in pictures. And then at the end of the year, you essentially get this bound book for the family, which is the life story of this person. And coming soon, there's going to be these micro books where, like, if a year is too long, you can do, for your dad, for his career, it'd be 30 questions over maybe 3 months, where it was like, it kind of, from the beginning, it was like, what was the job you got fired from? Like, how did you figure out what you're actually good at work? Like, what is your proudest moment? And you get these books. And so Time Capsule is essentially this collecting of, I like to say, family culture. So you can protect it, not only for you, but much more importantly, we're going to have families one day, and our families are going to have families, and they're not going to get a chance to ask these questions or see that, like, the weird, quirky strengths that they have, like the fact they're good at math, or that they have a lot of courage, actually was in your grandma, who did stuff in the 70s that, like, nobody believed she could. And it kind of makes people feel part of something bigger. But that's what Time Capsule is.
No, man, I think it's a genius concept, like a genius idea. Like, you're really capturing somebody's life story and life moments to be able to pass it down to future generations. So, like you said, the people after them can understand where they came from, and what their family did and accomplished.
Exactly. And I think that there's this, this is kind of maybe too heady, but I have this theory that one of the things that's become hard for us is because, we're on the internet all the time. Like, we just feel less connected to our parents' generation and our grandparents. And it's fine mostly, but, like, everybody wants to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, or understand, like, what it is that made our family, what it is that kind of, where we came from. And because there's such a gap between, like, how we communicate, given that we were online our whole fucking lives. Oops, I'll try not to cuss. And they were not, and they're more traditional, and they're slower to share stuff. That, like, finding ways to connect that is incredible for, I don't know, making people feel like there's something more than just, worrying about themselves, that they're part of something bigger.
For sure, man. So, I mean, like, how did you get started in this industry? Like, how did you come up with with such a, like, a deep idea like this, and bring it to fruition, and make it marketable, and make it into an actual product? Like, how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, like every good deep story, it had 0% deep roots. Like, it was just, I basically, so before this, I had two very large companies. One was called Laurel and Wolf, which was a tech company. We raised $70 million. It was an interior design marketplace. And then literally a week after kind of stepping away from that, I ended up starting a company called Vesta, which is now the largest home stager in the country. And so after doing that for a few years, I replaced myself as the CEO. And I kind of promised myself for 1 year, I would not go do any ideas that were huge venture capital, like try to change the world ideas, just for 1 year. And then I was at a dinner, family dinner, and my grandfather, who I'm pretty close with, starts off on this crazy ass story about, he went to the University of Illinois in the 60s. And, like, I'd say the dudes on one side of our family are like, we're thicker. And so he wrestled at the University of Illinois, and he was telling these stories. I heard a few, but then he talked about, like, him and his, like, roommate having to beat up these anti-Semitic dudes on campus. And, like, just, he's like, oh yeah. And he's talking about, like, what they said and whooping their ass on campus. And I was like, damn, I know some of the stories, but I don't know all of them. And he's like 90 now. He still has, like, a lot of fire. but I got time now and I love this kind of stuff. And so I just turned to him. I was like, I'm coming by 4 days in a row next week. I'm going to be here as long as it possibly takes. I'm bringing a camera and I'm going to ask you questions from the time, your first memory up until today. I'm going to record the whole thing. And I did it for my family, built this video player. And then all my friends started hitting me up. They're like, let me get my grandma on there. Let me get my Mima on there. Let me get my mom. And so right before COVID, I ended up making a deal where all my friends for a certain price at the time could drop one of their parents in my backyard and interview them for, I did a 2-hour sitting. And I'd give them the final product. And from there, a few of the people who had backed kind of some of my previous companies started to be like, this is something bigger than you're giving it credit for. And these stories were so cool and people were so touched. And like just the act knowing that they had this thing saved, where in the future, you may not want to watch your mom tell her life story today, but there's going to be 5 or 6 moments where you want it. And there's going to be 20 moments where your kids want it in the next 20, 30 years. And kind of the safety and knowing that it actually existed for the future, like just seeing that the customer, I'd never seen a customer kind of feel so excited. It was weird. It was emotional, but it also, people felt like they had done right by their family. And so I started experimenting or tinkering with how to do this digitally and like what people would do. And it took me, I don't know, about a year to kind of figure out what the optimal version of the product was. And now it's at trytimecapsule.com.
Man, that's super dope. So I mean, have you always been interested in kind of like learning about other people, learning about your history and kind of interviewing people? Or is it just that, your grandfather told you such a cool story? You like, man, I want to know more. You seem like a cool guy.
Um, Both, I guess. Like I said, man, growing up, I was like a wild boy. And like my thing was, I've always been like painfully curious. I want to know how everything works. I want to break everything. I want to see what everybody's limits are. And obviously, there's a huge cost to that growing up. Like you really learn every single lesson with, call it with blood. But because of that, like, I don't want to sound corny, but I'm interested in every person I meet. Like, as far as like, I want to know why you're that way. What's it like? Where in North Carolina are you from? Originally,
Eastern North Carolina,
what city?
Rocky Mountain, North Carolina.
Got it. I spent a little bit of time in Asheville and High Point and Hickory and all like the furniture districts, which I think is not, it's not close. It's like 2 hours from there, right?
Maybe like 4.
So it's a little bit further. And so like, I don't know, man, like what, like, did a lot of your friends move out of your area and like move to the coast, or most of them stay back in the like in North Carolina?
Most of them still in the same area.
So you're the one that like got out and gets to tell these stories about going and doing like crazy stuff. And like my guess,
Exactly.
yeah. And so like my bet for this whole entire interview, how often do you go back?
Like once a year.
Got it. And you probably have a couple friends still talk to you, but the most you don't. How's it go?
Yeah, man, I got a few people that I talk to for sure.
So like I genuinely would be interested in hearing like what it feels like to go back and forth. And the longer you kind of stay out and the more that like you kind of free base, like being on the coasts and like, or close to the coast and like they're like what it does. And I'm genuinely interested because it's like a weird experience that like being an LA boy, like I don't have. And so, yes, the answer directly is I want to hear why people do things is like the number one curiosity that I have.
For sure, man. Now that's super dope. So I mean, you've started multiple companies before this, man. So you're no stranger to like entrepreneurship. So what would you say are like some of the biggest takeaways that you learned from your previous companies that you use with Time Capsule?
Uh, I guess, I mean, there's like 1,000 things, but I'm trying to think what would be an interesting one. I guess one of the things, I said this to somebody else relatively recently, but like, I've been doing this a lot. This will be my 5th like real company. And if you count companies that like never even got off the ground, it's probably my 600th. But my 5th, like that's going to be like a thing that has a bunch of employees that raises capital and all that stuff. And I even struggle with this, but there's this instinct to plan, right? To like plan how you're going to do it. And then, make sure your plan is thoughtful and smart. And I think that it's bad advice for, you do want to like plan and like know a little bit of kind of what you're doing, but most planning tends to be rationalization, in the sense that like you're kind of convincing yourself why you're doing something or why something might work. And it tends to be a waste of time. It just ends up kind of slowing down your ability to kind of act, I guess I'd say. And so all of the best things that have happened to me historically with my companies have essentially been me acting with enough planning that it's like not suicide, but not enough planning where like you're just reacting. Like, do people like this? Like, what is the takeaway from this? And so I'd say one of the biggest things is just, I feel like I took too long to kind of get this product out to the marketplace. But one of the biggest things is just this kind of, this lean toward acting instead of thinking or planning. You just don't know kind of how things are going to shake out in most of, like, when you meet somebody who knows a lot about a space, or seems like they have good instincts, mostly those instincts are honed by, metaphorically speaking, getting punched in the face and doing things wrong sometimes, and then also having success in doing it right. And you just don't gain a lot of judgment from planning. You gain it from doing. And so just a bend toward trying stuff and knowing that like it doesn't matter, it just keeps going, is probably, at least for me in the last 3 months, is probably the largest theme that for Time Capsule specifically, that I've been thinking a lot about, and how I got to this point with the product.
No, man, I think that's a great piece of advice and a great way to look at it. Like, don't just over plan. Like, just go out there and do it. Just try it. But what would you say is like one of the biggest surprising moments or like biggest shocks that you've learned from Time Capsule? So you mentioned earlier, like, you recorded your grandfather, and then you had other people coming up to you like, hey, I want you to do this for my grandmother or my mother. Like, I'm sure that was probably a shock to you, like, wow, you want this too. So have you experienced any other shocks like that?
Yeah, I think I was surprised by the level in which people kind of liked it. I think one of the funnier surprises, specifically at Time Capsule, is that, everyone's part of a family, right? And family's got drama, man, like big drama. And I think that I expected people to kind of be a little bit more petty about, like, if they're fighting with their mom or their sister, they would avoid doing these things. But it was interesting. A lot of drama in families, there's like people acknowledge, even though they will stay in the drama as long as they possibly can. Like, that's just how it goes. But people were much more willing to exist on like two planes, where like, I'm pissed at this person, but also I know I'm going to want this thing, so I'm still going to do it. And so I'd never considered that, like, at scale, people had the capacity to both be pissed, but then also kind of get their business done with each other. And that's kind of one of the funny things, just watching all of the users like both have the whole, I don't like you today, but I kind of like you over a year, and over a decade, I love you. And like seeing how that kind of manifested. And yeah, there've been a couple of stories where, bombshells were dropped in the stories. I know from customers and users who've told me about them. And so it's just kind of cool. Like, I have this theory about family culture, in that, you're in your business, right? Like, you tell everybody the number one responsibility is passing on your family's financial future, protecting it so everybody in the future can kind of harvest from it and like continue having opportunities because of the sacrifices you made. And I think that there's this opportunity now where people should be treating the culture of their family the same way they treat their finances. And so it's kind of one of these things where if you're not collecting it and protecting it, you're kind of not doing, you're doing everybody dirty who comes after you. The same way would be if you died with debt, or you ended up, bequeathing your money to somebody who wasn't part of the family. It is your responsibility to shepherd and protect like what makes your family unit, the culture that makes your family unit a family. And I think that nobody's really told that story before. And so I'm surprised by how receptive people have been to that.
For sure. I mean, and when you just talk about the business and talk about the family piece of it, and the connection that it brings, or the truth that it reveals. It just seems like this business is would really thrive off word of mouth. And that's just an assumption, but it just seems like, man, one person can't help but to tell somebody else that they did it, and then they'll want to do it, and it just kind of goes on forever, you know?
That's right. Not only is it like that I hear a cool story, but like I think that it's one of these things where you're expressing to the people that you know, forget even outside your family, you're expressing to the people you know that the way that you're showing love for your family is giving them a platform to kind of tell these stories. And so then when you hear that is somebody, a friend, you're just kind of like, well, shit, I'm not doing that. And if I don't do it and I've heard it, nobody will do it. And so it kind of does this thing where it's tough. Nobody really talks about like doing this kind of stuff. But when you start to hear it, it's like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And so you have it exactly. Like as the more you hear it, the more you're like, shit, I can't believe I didn't think about that first. And second, I better do it before I run out of time. I hear like not to be dark, but the other side of it is often it's people who have really young parents and something tragic happened to one of them, and so they have this incredible kind of conviction to get it done with the remaining parent because they understand that like waiting too long can have consequences for it. And it doesn't have to be old people. Like a lot of the stories of like that they regret not capturing happen to be people they lost suddenly, or people they lost touch with even emotionally, where like you don't see this person anymore and it would be very hard for you guys to reconnect to capture it. And so I think it puts a lot of things into perspective. It's also, I mean, if I'm being honest, it's also a really easy gift to give for birthdays and Mother's Day and stuff, where it's both thoughtful, but also, you don't have to go ride around town to like do the most creative thing.
Man, I think it's a really genius idea, man. It's something that like I said, I haven't heard. And I feel like it's something that's really becoming popular, especially with people trying to um like trace their history and do all this DNA stuff. 23andMe, like I feel like it's a dope tie-in to that entire concept. But just on to my next question, man. You've had several businesses like I mentioned before. So, how did you get good at business? Is it something that developed over time, or did you always have like a natural like were you just naturally good at it and born with it?
It's funny, man. This question is like both the lifeblood and the death of entrepreneurs. Personally, I think I'm okay at business, but I think that's a reflection of me always seeing everything I could have done better. And like, you don't see the stuff you did well and be like, God, I'm great at it. Like, you see the shit you're terrible at, and you're like, that was embarrassing. Like, I can't believe I thought that was the move. But I don't know. The two things that kind of come to mind, the direct question or direct answer to your question is I think that like my wiring was that I was always confident and a little pushy. So it allowed me to learn fast by taking lots of risks, like all through my life, and just developing like experiences, or like, oh, I remember this thing going this way and this applies to this thing kind of. And so I think I accumulated experiences like a little bit younger than a lot of my friends did, just because I was kind of crazy. But I don't think I was naturally inclined to anything with business. And then one of the things that, this is not a direct answer to your question, but it's interesting. One of the things that I see as like the downfall of many, 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 many of my smartest, most successful friends is there's this tendency when you get really good, have a success, like say, like, you build a big business, to think that general smarts means that you'll just be kind of a leg up or good at whatever projects you get into. And they end up overvaluing their experience as kind of this natural intelligence. And it never works that way. Like, experience is so much better than intelligence, mostly because like you just miss the details. And so it becomes the thing that I see in the smartest people I know is this idea that like they never know enough, right? They're always, everything's complicated when they're asked to make a decision. They still act and decide, but like it's this acknowledgement that like you basically don't know shit no matter what you're doing. And so yeah, I suck at business, but I keep moving on. That's the internal monologue. But yeah.
For sure, man. And you say some interesting things like before we got started recording, you mentioned that you were heading out to a dinner, and now you mentioned, some of the smartest people that you know. So, that just leads me to ask, what's the importance of networking and building relationships and just kind of staying around those smart people that you mentioned? And is that something that you focus on?
Very much so. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, you know, I really want to hear kind of why, like what you get, like what you like about this podcast, because this is a good jump off for, I want to hear, like my guess is the guests normally talk, but I'd love to hear like what you get most out of talking to people. We'll get to that in 1 second because I want to answer and then we'll go to it. But in general, like I love people. I'm interested in why people's brains do things. And every single person comes from these weird, different experiences. And every conversation kind of sort of builds a mental model of like how to think of different types of people that you meet in the future or different types of events. And when I was young, in like my 20s and stuff, and I didn't really have any connections or anything, I aggressively networked for like to get ahead. And it's funny, it's just like give you a good story. There was this co-working space in 2008, 2009, 2010 in Los Angeles. It was before tech kind of got sexy and everybody became an entrepreneur. So only one in town at the time. And there's got to be 60 entrepreneurs in there, right? And everybody was just working their fucking asses off. Like nobody had money. Like everyone was working on their little tech company. And I think out of those 60 people, there's something like 25 companies ended up being worth over $200 million. Like, and Uber wasn't started there, but like it really, they were in there they were running out of there at the time. Like, and they used to be the CEO, the founder and everything was in there all the time. But it's this thing where networking is not about getting ahead. Now that I'm looking back at it, it's about like connect with peers, because if you stick with whatever you're doing, everybody levels up kind of at the same time over time. And you'll find yourself 5-10 years later where all your boys and girls who like you drink with, who like you only get tacos with because you're all broke, end up becoming these power players. And no matter how much business there is to be done, like there's this connection between you, even if you don't see them for 5 years or whatever, that like y'all got started together. And so it's just this thing where like, just get to know everybody, try to always try to help for free. If you can, that shit comes back in spades.
For sure, man, for sure. No, and I think that's a great way to look at it. It's not necessarily about getting ahead, but it's about like just creating those relationships and creating those moments and those memories.
But it is about getting ahead too. It's one of those things. This is kind of what it is that like, if you do a relationship to try to get ahead right away, it's kind of like dating, to be honest. Like if you go on a date and try to like close the deal, like right up top, it almost always backfires. But like anything that like, if you can go longer and like not make it about just kind of an end game, like you end up just always having more success. Always. Like, don't be so worried about the outcome. Just be excellent, like to everybody you meet, and like be truly interested. And all of those people are going to get a chance to have your back. And a lot of them won't do shit. But like, I promise, like you will have an insane amount of allies. Like as time goes, it's this idea of like the most amazing, what's it? Albert Einstein said the second most amazing thing in the world is compound interest. It's the idea that like money in an account obviously compounds and compounds when you sleep. And the same thing is about like networks and people thinking you're helpful, people thinking you're smart. Like if you're just good to everybody and you stick around in the same business for 5 or 10 years, like you're just a monster. Everybody knows you.
For sure. For sure. So, how do you define success as an entrepreneur?
Oof. I don't know. What would I say? Don't get me wrong. I like the money and I like all that kind of stuff. But I feel like most days I wake up and I'm working on problems that are like intellectually challenging, that have an enormous upside. I'm working with people that are smarter than me in just about every category that like people can be an expert in. And so there's this thing. I was talking to another pretty big entrepreneur at dinner last night. And like you have these like two phases of your entrepreneurship, I think. There's when you have enough money from your ventures where you're not super worried about money. You're not like stupid rich, but like you know you're going to be okay. And so you work super hard and you stress to get to that point. And like it's not it's still fun, but it's like existential. But once you get to that, it becomes about like, you know, you're just challenging yourself. Like you're doing, and you end up having much larger outcomes when you get to that point. Cause like you like the work, you're going deep into it. And so I guess the success thing is I get to work on what the fuck I want whenever I want, give or take. And I see that kind of into the immediate future and the far out future continuing. And like, that's what it is. I don't know.
What would you say is the most important reason for your success?
Oof. Uh, Luck, probably. I mean, don't get me wrong. I work super hard and I'm pretty aggressive about like everything I do. But I always said that like, at least for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but I did this for so long, you know, this for whatever is 10, 12 years of like tech, which doesn't seem a long time, but like that's like basically my working years at this point. And you just survive long enough to like get luck to notice what is like an outsized opportunity and be able to seize it. You can never kind of figure out what's going to work or whatever, but if like you've done it long enough, you should be good at recognizing like, oh shit, that thing is important and rare. That's what I should be doing. And then know exactly how to kind of stick with it. And so I guess it'd be two things then. It would be sticking with it and getting lucky would be the two things that I think are responsible.
How would you like for people to remember you and your company?
Damn. The irony. It's like a meta question. Um, we are going to be the library of humanity. And it's going to be something that was a no-brainer once it's done. And it's going to affect everybody. There's this great place out in Norway. It's in the middle of northern Norway in the Arctic Circle, right? It's this built into the snow. It's called the seed vault, right? And they have 10,000 of every seed in the whole entire world in there. So if like we nuclear apocalypse, like it stays frozen in the permafrost. It also looks like a villain's lair. It's the dopest building. If y'all haven't, Google Norway seed vault. But my big inspiration is this idea of both a digital and physical place that like people come to like go and see what everybody was doing. And so that's what I want to be remembered for. I want to create this place that is the library of human story.
Man, that was one of the deepest responses I ever heard out of recording these podcasts. Man, that's dope. The library of the human experience of humans, that's fire. But yeah, man. So what does the future of Time Capsule look like to you?
Um, Hopefully getting into people's lives and getting people to tell these stories, and not only getting people to buy it, but figuring out it's hard, man. Everybody got different ways they want to express themselves. Some people love to talk, some people hate it, some people are embarrassed by their story. And so, continuing to develop a product that makes it comfortable for everybody to tell their story and to develop there's all of these I don't want to give away some of the new products coming next, but there are so many different experiences that we have that are emotionally powerful to the people that we care about and to us, especially when we reminisce about that. But it would be to systematically figure out what means the most to people and make it really easy for them to capture it and then organize it for those that want to see it in the future. And so that's it. But if you want a direct answer, everybody go to trytimecapsule.com and buy one. Trytimecapsule.com. Trytimecapsule.com.
Nah, man, that's dope. Brandon, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it, and I really think you have an extremely cool business, man, and a cool company. I look forward to seeing your company grow.
Let
But
me ask you
before
one question before we sign off.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite part about these podcasts?
The people
But
and
what is it?
learning.
What do you like about it? Give me like what is between think about Wesley's first episode to this episode. Like what
Yeah.
has been the big difference that gets you hyped about this stuff?
Man, I just like learning, man. Like hearing ideas and hearing people's stories. Like I like hearing triumphant stories. So I like history too. Like I watch a lot of documentaries, a lot of music documentaries, and just seeing people's lives and like how they navigated through it. And I want to be successful. So I'm like, I feel like the best way to do that is to talk to like 1,000 successful people, and then you combine it all together. So like while I'm learning, I can document history at the same time and document somebody's journey. So I feel like it's like the best of both worlds.
Hell yeah. Well, listen, I think, by the way, like your enthusiasm and curiosity comes through in all of this. But what we got to do in the future is we got to get somebody interview you at some point, even if it's just like one, you're going to want to compare it as you get more powerful and like in successful and stuff like that, and see what young Wesley looks like to like, now Wesley or whatever it is. But we got to get you as the feature, at least coming up on one of these.
For sure, man. I think that's a great idea.
So.
But yeah, man, before I let you go, we like to play a rapid fire question game at the end of every podcast. So if you're willing to play, I'll go
Hell
ahead
yeah.
and ask.
Let's do it.
For sure. All right. So question number one, where's your favorite place to travel?
My favorite country or city is probably Istanbul, Turkey.
Why?
It's so weird. It's the only place that like really does combine modern city, old world, and just it's right by Asia too. I can't explain it, but the city feels different. And I've been everywhere in the world. It feels different than any place.
Super dope. Question number two, what song represents your life the most?
Oof. Represents my life. I'd probably say that my favorite song is the Art of Storytelling by Outkast. The second one, not the first one, which is I think it's yeah. And it's just this idea that like everybody's running their own little game here, but like if you slow down and tell it like a story, it's interesting to everybody, and that's where that song goes.
That's dope. All right, look, man. And final question.
Yeah.
What's an amazing thing that you did that no one was around to see?
Oof. I don't think anybody, I adopted my pit bull when I was 25 years old and I was broke, like legit. My Bank of America was red. I did it as an impulsive thing. And I was immature and I was living on my own. And obviously, everyone had kids. I don't think anybody in my life appreciates the struggle and the pain that the first 2 years of trying to raise a dog as a 25-year-old who knew nothing was. It made every one of my companies look like nothing. And my dog is very smart and it made it 10x as difficult. But I think it's that.
For sure, man. Brandon, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Likewise, Wesley. I love that you're doing this. Keep it up. And I can't wait to see another 100 episodes. All right.
Thank you, my guy.